we talk about a lot of different stuff on this show, all sorts of things about what it means to be human.
Yeah.
But I think underneath it all, there's kind of this like fundamental thing, right?
Hmm.
That affects pretty much, well, everything else, and that's self-esteem.
Absolutely.
And it's not just, like feeling good about yourself every now and then.
Right.
Our sources for this deep dive, they really go deep, and they call it essential for psychological survival.
Wow.
They even use this term sine qua non,
Okay.
which basically means like something that's absolutely vital for our emotional well-being.
Right. You can't really function without it.
Exactly.
Right.
And they're really clear that without some degree of self-worth, life can be, I mean, really painful, just incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I can see that.
And even just, like basic things, like
Right.
just getting your basic needs met, it can become this huge uphill battle.
That makes sense, yeah.
So what's so interesting to me is that we humans, we have this really unique ability, I think, to kind of look at ourselves, right? Like actually form an idea of who we are.
Right.
And then, this is the kicker, decide whether we actually like that person or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And our sources point out that it's often this very capacity for self-judgment.
Oh, okay.
That's where a lot of our struggles with self-esteem actually begin.
I see. So it's not just like disliking something about ourselves.
No, it's deeper than that.
Okay.
It's more like this. When we actually reject parts of ourselves,
Right.
like we push them away,
Yeah.
that's when it can cause some real damage psychologically.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's almost like we've got, this internal critic, right? This voice that's just constantly like
Yeah.
scoring our every move,
Totally.
But here's the thing, and this is a really key insight that I got from our material for today.
Okay.
Self-esteem, it's not actually directly tied to what's happening around us.
Oh, interesting.
Not in some kind of fixed way, you
Yeah.
know? Our sources actually say that it's determined 100% of the time
Wow. Okay.
by our thoughts.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
The mirror analogy that they use in one of the books, I think it illustrates this so well.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
It's like you can look at your reflection
Uh-huh.
and have totally different thoughts about the exact same image.
Oh, yeah.
One minute you're like, huh, I look terrible.
Right.
And then the next, okay, actually, this outfit, it kind of works.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the reality, what you see in the mirror, it hasn't changed.
No, it's the same.
Right. But what has changed is your internal dialogue, your thoughts about it. And that completely changes how that image impacts you.
So it's all about how we're interpreting what we're seeing.
Exactly. 100%.
All right. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
If our thoughts are really the key here,
Right.
then I guess really understanding them and learning how to like shift those thoughts. I mean, that becomes the goal, right?
It does.
So our material, it promises these techniques, all these things to, boost our self-esteem.
Okay.
But I'm noticing right away that this is not some kind of like passive thing. It's not just about listening and absorbing information.
No, it's not a magic pill.
No, not at all. It's about doing the work.
Yeah.
And it's about trying out those exercises and actually like, learning the skills that they talk about.
Absolutely. This deep dive, it's not just about information.
Right.
It's about giving you, the listener, practical stuff that you can actually use to make changes.
To change your life.
Exactly.
So our mission today, it's really clear, I think.
Yeah. What is it?
We're going to explore these cognitive techniques that our sources present, and they say that these are the way to like quickly and effectively build your self-esteem.
Interesting.
And a big part of that is going to be, those patterns of negative self-talk that we all have. And those thinking traps, which they call cognitive distortions.
Okay.
And really like developing a much kinder, more understanding way of looking at ourselves.
So kind of rewiring how we see ourselves.
Exactly. And rewiring how we talk to ourselves, that inner voice.
I like that.
So where do we start?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Well, our sources, they introduce this concept of the pathological critic.
The what?
The pathological critic.
Okay.
And it's that inner voice, right?
Yeah, okay.
That jumps in, during those times when we're just like beating ourselves up.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that relentless commentary on everything that we think we've done wrong or we haven't done well enough.
It's like nonstop sometimes.
It can be brutal. So what's so fascinating here
Okay.
is that our sources, they really emphasize that it's important to actually identify this critic,
Yeah.
to really see it.
Like, figure out what it is.
Yeah, like, what is this voice? And they even say, like, give it a name.
Oh, interesting.
Like, actually name it.
What kind of names?
Well, they give some examples. Like,
Yeah.
you could call it the bully.
Yep.
Or Mr. Perfect.
Mr. Perfect. I like that.
Right. And they actually even mention client examples,
Yeah.
like, from their work with people.
Okay.
There was one person, they named their critic Marcia.
Harsha.
Yeah. And it turned out that was, like, their mother's name.
Oh, wow.
So, there can be some deep stuff there. But
Right, yeah.
the point is, this idea of personalizing it,
Mm-hmm.
our sources say that it helps you start to take ownership of this concept.
Okay.
To see it as a separate entity.
So it's not like you exactly.
Not you, exactly, yeah.
That's a good distinction.
And then there's this question of, like, how loud is this critic?
Yeah, right.
And how nasty is it?
Because some people, it's like pretty vicious.
It can be.
Yeah.
And our material, it connects that directly to those early, what they call not okay feelings
Oh,
we had.
So like when we were kids.
Yeah, like, early childhood experiences. And they say the stronger and more negative those messages were,
Yeah.
the louder and more vicious our adult inner critic tends to be.
That makes sense.
So they actually break down, like, 5 main things that shape how strong those early feelings are.
Okay, let's hear it.
And the first one, I think it's really interesting. It's about how often things like, our personal preferences
Right.
or our needs, our
Mhm.
sense of safety, or even just, like, bad decision,
Yeah.
they were all treated as if they were, like, moral failings.
Wow.
Like, think about a family where, a child wants something different for dinner, and they're made to feel, like, morally wrong for that.
Like you've done something bad.
Yeah, or, like, where getting a bad grade is seen as, like, a sin.
Oh, wow.
It's that level of, like,
Intensity.
yeah, intensity. And the sources really point out the impact of using, like, moralizing language. Those words like lazy
Oh, yeah.
or selfish.
Right, right.
These labels, they carry so much weight, and they leave us with this lasting sense of, like, being fundamentally flawed.
Even years later.
Yeah, long after we've, like, forgotten what the actual situation was.
That's really interesting.
And then the second thing
Okay.
that they talk about,
Yeah.
it's about whether our parents actually distinguished between our behavior and our identity.
Okay, what do you mean?
So think about it, like, a kid who hears running in the street is dangerous.
Right.
They learn about the consequences, right?
Right.
But a kid who's labeled a bad boy
Right.
for running in the street, they get a different message, which is,
Like they're a bad person.
yeah, like their very being is somehow wrong.
Right.
And this blurring of the lines
Okay, yeah.
between what we do and who we are,
Yeah.
that can really, like, fuel a much harsher inner critic later on.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so it's about
It's about separating the action from the person.
exactly. And the third thing that our sources mention is,
Yeah.
the degree to which our parents kind of gave love conditionally,
Oh,
where their approval depended on specific, achievements or behaviors.
right. Like you have to earn their love.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're teaching a child that their worth isn't inherent.
Hmm.
It's something that has to be, like, constantly earned
And proven.
and proven. Yeah, so it can lead to this lifelong need to
Yeah.
prove themselves.
Right.
And then the fourth thing that they mention has to do with, like, how often
Yeah.
and how intensely we experienced, like, shaming messages.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Things like direct insults, sarcasm, humiliation.
Right. Those can be rough.
These kinds of attacks, they really, like, wound a child's sense of self-worth,
Yeah.
and it becomes, like, fuel for the inner critics.
Right. It's like ammunition.
Ammunition. Yeah, exactly. And then finally, and this one I think is particularly powerful, is how often those forbidding gestures, like when a parent turns away in anger or,
Right.
those kinds of things, were actually linked to parental anger or withdrawal.
Okay.
And our sources say that, kids can handle some criticism. That's natural.
Right. Okay.
But when it's paired with the parent becoming, like, angry
Yeah.
or threatening to withdraw their love,
Right.
that's when it really has a huge impact.
So it's like that feeling of you're bad and I'm rejecting you.
Yeah. And that is terrifying for a child.
It is, yeah.
And it's so likely to, like, stick with them.
And that's what the critic uses later on.
Exactly. The critic, as we get older, it uses that ingrained sense of being wrong
Right.
to keep up the attack.
The self-attack.
Yeah, the psychological self-attack. It's brutal, so.
So the key takeaway here,
Yeah.
it's those early experiences where maybe our needs or judgments were, kind of moralized.
Right, right.
Where our actions were seen as defining our entire being, or where love felt conditional.
Right.
All of that kind of lays the groundwork for a really harsh inner critic.
Yeah, and so we've identified this pathological critic,
Right.
and we have a little better understanding of where it might come from.
Uh-huh.
But how does this voice actually work to, like, chip away at our self-esteem today?
That's the big question.
It is, and our sources talk about these things called cognitive distortions.
Cognitive distortions.
Yeah, have you heard of those before?
I have, but remind me.
Yeah, so basically, they're patterns of thinking.
Okay.
That are they're twisted, they're inaccurate, and they constantly lead to us feeling worse about ourselves.
So they're like thinking traps.
Exactly. They're thinking traps. And the material really emphasizes that a really big part of boosting your self-esteem is actually learning to recognize these things.
Okay.
And to challenge them.
To challenge these distortions.
Yeah, to actually, like, confront them. So
what are some of the specific distortions?
well, there are several. And the first one that they talk about is toxic labels.
Toxic labels.
And they give these examples like stupid, fraud, idiot.
Ouch.
Right, and they explain that these are like all-encompassing put-downs, right?
Yeah.
It's a total judgment about the person.
Right, right.
It's not like feedback on something specific they did.
It's like a character assassination.
It is. It's like, you are this thing.
So the core problem is
Yeah.
that toxic labels, they trap us in these like fixed negative identities.
Exactly. Exactly. And then we have this thing called overgeneralization.
Overgeneralization.
This is when you take one negative thing that happens and you create this broad, untested rule out of it.
Okay.
So, like, for example, you have a small argument with a colleague at work. And suddenly you're thinking, I always mess up my work relationships.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's taking one isolated thing and blowing it up into this universal truth.
Right. So overgeneralization.
Yeah.
It turns one-off incidents into these like inescapable truths.
Right. And it's just not true, usually.
Right. But it feels true.
Yeah, it feels true. And then there's personalization.
Personalization. Okay.
This is the tendency to believe that everything is about you.
Oh, okay.
Even when it's clearly not.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And our sources give this great example.
Okay.
You know, like, your roommate is complaining that the apartment's too small.
Right.
And you immediately assume that they mean you have too much stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Or a friend says they're bored.
Right.
And you think they're bored with you.
Oh, yeah, that's classic personalization.
It is. And it's like...
So the core thing there is that personalization, it makes you the center of everyone else's, like, unrelated issues.
Right. It's all about me.
Yeah.
And then there's this tricky one, mind reading.
Mind reading.
Which is basically when you assume you know what other people are thinking.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And especially when you assume that they agree with your negative thoughts about yourself.
Oh, okay.
So the text gives these examples. Like, she can totally tell I'm boring.
Hell yeah.
Or he's quiet because I was late and he's definitely angry about it.
Right, right.
You know, it's like...
Like we're projecting our own insecurities onto other people.
And we're just assuming that they see us the same way that our critic sees us.
Exactly. So the danger there is that mind reading, it makes us believe that other people see us through our own very critical lens.
Right, but they probably don't.
Probably not.
And then there are control fallacies.
Control fallacies.
Okay, which our sources say come in two flavors.
Okay.
You can either feel responsible for absolutely everything that happens or completely powerless.
So, like, no control at all.
No control. So on the over-control side, it's like, you know, feeling responsible for how every single guest behaves at your party.
Oh, yeah.
Or even your child's grades.
Wow. That's a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure. And then on the under control side, it's that feeling of like being a victim, you know, just completely at the mercy of forces outside of yourself.
Right. Like you can't do anything about it.
Helpless. So
control fallacies, they either burden us with like all this responsibility.
Yeah.
That's not realistic.
Right.
Or they totally take away our sense of Like agency.
that we can actually do something.
Exactly.
And then our text introduces polarized thinking.
Polarized thinking.
It's this like all or nothing, black and white way of seeing things.
Okay.
And the sources offer this really practical way to challenge this.
Well,
They say use percentages.
Percentages, okay.
Yeah, so instead of thinking, that car show was a total disaster.
Right.
Maybe your car got like an 80 out of 100 points.
Okay, so you're bringing in like shades of gray?
Shades of gray, exactly.
Instead of black and white?
Yeah, or instead of saying a meal was garbage.
Right.
Maybe the main dish was like 50%. Okay.
Yeah.
The salad was 80% and the dessert was 40%, whatever.
It makes you think about it differently.
It does, and it challenges that absolute thinking, So
the core insight with polarized thinking
yeah.
is that it really blinds us to the nuances of what's actually happening.
Exactly. It's like there's no in between.
Yeah, it's just good or bad. That's it.
And the world is so much more complex than that, so.
It is.
It's amazing how these distortions can really, like, twist how we see things.
Yeah, they're sneaky.
They are sneaky, and, our sources also get into this seeming or strange idea of how the inner critic can actually keep itself going by negatively reinforcing itself.
Wait, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is that they say the critic can actually give us these temporary feelings of, like, worth and acceptance.
Oh, wow.
Even while it's tearing us down in the long run.
That's tricky?
It's tricky. So they say it does this in two main ways.
Okay.
In terms of our sense of self-worth.
All right.
The first way is through comparing ourselves to others.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is, and the critic is constantly doing this, right?
It's like always measuring.
Always measuring, yeah. And most of the time, we end up feeling inadequate. But every once in a while, there's that little moment where we feel superior.
Right.
That gives us a little boost.
It's like a little hit of dopamine or something.
It is. It's like, think about it, like a slot machine.
Okay.
The occasional win keeps you pulling that lever.
Even though you mostly lose.
Even though you're losing. Yeah, and it's the same with those fleeting moments of feeling superior.
Right. It keeps us coming back for more.
Yeah, even though it's not good for us in the long run.
And that's what the sources call that variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
Yes, exactly. Where those random payoffs, like feeling smarter or more attractive or whatever.
Right.
It just keeps that habit of comparing going, even though it's mostly making us feel bad.
I see that.
And then the second way that this negative reinforcement happens is through setting these incredibly high, impossible standards for ourselves.
Oh, yeah, that's another good one.
And even though we might constantly fail to meet them, the very act of trying to reach these perfect ideals, it can give us this temporary feeling of being like all-powerful.
Right, like we have control.
We have control, and if we just work hard enough, we could be perfect.
Which helps us avoid feeling not good enough.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like a distraction technique.
It is. It's a distraction from those deeper feelings.
Of inadequacy.
Yes. And beyond that, our sources talk about how the critic also helps us manage painful feelings.
Oh, interesting.
Which is kind of, again, counterintuitive.
It is, because you think the critic would make you feel worse.
You would, but they say when the critic's voice actually helps to lessen or even like stop a painful feeling, that voice actually becomes really powerful.
It gets reinforced.
Yeah, it gets reinforced, even though it's ultimately damaging.
That's fascinating.
So they give some examples of how the critic tries to control, things like that feeling of being not okay or worthless.
Yeah.
Guilt, fear, anger, all of that.
Okay, let's focus on that feeling of being not okay or worthless.
Yeah. So our sources say pretty much everybody has doubts about their worth.
Right, at times.
At times, yeah.
Yeah.
But for those of us with low self-esteem, these doubts can be really overwhelming, and that's when the critic steps in.
What does it do?
It creates those impossible standards of perfection.
Right.
And it suggests that if we just achieve enough, then we won't feel so inadequate anymore.
So it's like a false promise.
It is. It's a false promise of control.
Right, but through goals that are basically impossible to reach.
Exactly.
What about guilt?
Well, when it comes to guilt, they say the critic often uses punishment as a way to try and control it. And they contrast this with a much healthier approach, which is actually looking at whether that guilt comes from going against, like, healthy values
Okay.
or unhealthy shoulds that we've picked up.
Right, and they're going to talk more about shoulds later on.
Yes, they do, so we'll get into that.
I'm looking forward to that.
So, okay, we know who the enemy is, right?
The pathological critic.
This pathological critic.
Right.
And we're starting to understand some of its, like, sneaky tactics. So how do we actually start to disarm it?
Yeah, how do we fight back?
That's the big question. And our sources emphasize that simply becoming aware that this critical voice is even there, that's a huge first step.
It's like knowing your enemy.
It is, because secrecy is one of the critic's biggest weapons.
So bringing it out into the open.
Exactly, yeah. And so being able to actually hear it
right,
and identify its attacks, that's crucial.
Okay, I get that.
And, you know, the text reminds us that every time the critic strikes, it's causing real psychological damage.
It's taking its toll.
It is. It's hurting our sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
And it's costing us, you know, in our relationships, in our work, in our well-being.
It's expensive.
It's very expensive. And our sources, they give us some clues about when we should be especially on the lookout for these attacks.
Oh, okay, good.
So it's not just after we've made a mistake or when someone else has, you know, criticized us.
Right.
But it's also when we're already feeling kind of down or depressed, like those negative emotions, they can often be a signal that the critic is hard at work.
That's good to know.
It is. It's like a little red flag.
And then how do we actually, like, talk back to it?
Yeah, so the text introduces some ways to talk back to this critic.
Okay.
To directly challenge it.
I like that.
So the first one involves actually confronting it.
Okay.
Like calling it names.
Oh, interesting.
Telling it to be quiet.
Okay.
And really stating out loud the negative impact it's having on your life.
So really make it clear.
Clear, yeah. And our sources even suggest, like, create a short summary of how the critic has hurt you.
Right.
To use in these moments.
That's a good idea.
And then there's this really important part about affirming our own worth.
Okay, yeah.
And the text acknowledges this can be really tough.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got those deep-seated beliefs that there's something fundamentally wrong with you.
Right.
But they stress that just silencing the critic isn't enough. You actually have to replace that negativity with this positive awareness of your own value.
So it's not just enough to get rid of the bad.
Right. You have to actually replace it with something good.
Yes, exactly. So
how do we do that?
Well, to help with that, they introduced this idea of a compassionate mentor.
A compassionate mentor.
Which is basically an internal voice that feels safe, supportive, and offers, like, wise advice.
So it's like a counter voice to the critic.
Exactly. It's like, instead of that harsh critic,
you
have this kind of, like, wise, loving friend.
It's a good image. Host.